Rolling.
Sound up.
Closing the door.
Sorry, what was your name again?
Kathryn.
Kathryn.
Camera set.
I was trying to think, not expecting to be interviewing you today, and just thinking about the book that you've written, just and all the amazing things that I've seen and read about you. As I was telling you before, I've only just, this is a whole new area for me, but how interesting it is. And your book, I wasn't going to talk about with the end in mind. What did you hope to achieve with the book? Why do you think the world needs the book?
I wasn't really quite sure what I wanted to achieve. I just knew that we couldn't keep talking about dying at the very end of life when it was too late to make choices and good decisions, one family at a time in the healthcare system. That this is much bigger than the healthcare system. This is about people. This is about society. It's about something that's a really rich wisdom that people had and that somehow we've lost and given away, probably because healthcare got so clever that it was worth coming into hospital in case your life might be saved when you were so sick you might die. And of course some people, their lives are saved for a while. But the kind of back end of that, the flip end of that, is we stopped seeing people dying at home and being familiar with the process of it. So I was reflecting on my grandmother when she was 23, in 1923. She'd seen dying at home as one of the women who was looking after dying people. When I was 23, I'd just graduated from medical school. I spent 5 years being trained how to stop people from dying, and I didn't know anything about the process of ordinary dying. So I think what I wanted was somehow we'd give that back to people by showing them it the same way she'd seen it over and over. And I can show them the people I've met, the people I've walked alongside, how they lived while they were dying, because we always think about dying rather than living the last parts of our lives. So I set out to try and do that and put those stories out into the world, without any great ambition other than that I would get it off my chest, to be honest. What happened next has been completely extraordinary, and I just didn't expect any of that.
And what did happen next?
Well, a variety of things. It was shortlisted for a literary prize, the Wellcome Book Prize, which is a medical book prize. So that then got it to the attention of book festivals and the media. And our most influential book reviewing newspaper, the Sunday Times, chose it as its book of the week. The reviewer wrote this amazing review, and by the end of that weekend, it was a bestseller on Amazon. And I subsequently met that reviewer, Christina Patterson, absolutely delightful woman, who had herself been multiply bereaved, I then discovered. So she needed those stories. She was one of those people who was consoled by understanding better what it was she'd seen at the bedsides of dying people. And since then I've had, it's at least hundreds, it might be thousands now, of messages from people who'd sat beside a dying person, who'd watched them lapsing into unconsciousness, because that's usually what happens, and then who'd heard the really strange breathing that people do when they're deeply unconscious. It can be noisy, it can look effortful. It actually tells us that the person's deeply unconscious, they're completely safe. But if you don't know that, and if nobody in the room beside you tells you that, then you're left thinking that your person is struggling. And that, of course, makes your bereavement so much worse. So the letters from people who've walked with me alongside these dying people and suddenly thought, oh, my mum was completely safe. Oh, my husband was deeply unconscious. And it's just changed how they're able to grieve. So absolutely worthwhile, but huge. And, I'm in New Zealand talking about a book that I wrote, and I've been to other places similar to the sorts of places where we live, across Europe, across North America, but I've also been really very different from us. So Peru, perhaps the most different, where most people who'd be reading the book wouldn't have access to the kind of healthcare that we have in your islands or our islands. But still, they've somehow lost the tradition of remembering and talking about that they had. And all I want is that people start to notice again, start to understand again, start to talk about it as though it's a thing that happens. Then it's wise that we talk about it, instead of it being a secret that we only break open in the last few often difficult days of people's lives. Difficult because they haven't had the conversations earlier on.
Have you seen a shift or a change over the course of your palliative care career? Have you seen a change of people? Are they starting to talk about it a little bit more, or are we still stuck in not wanting to have those conversations?
I think there's a very gradual change, and there's a kind of swell of people who are wanting to make a difference. And because we're all so much more connected now by different social media and things like that, those people can find each other. So there are big networks now in New Zealand, in the UK, but also around the world. So I'm meeting people here in New Zealand, palliative care people, but also end-of-life doulas, people from every walk of life who can train to be your companion during those final important weeks and days and hours. And we wouldn't have known each other before the internet did its thing. I think the other thing that's changing is in the healthcare system, where I don't work anymore, palliative care is becoming a respected specialty. It's a career choice for people. It wasn't even invented when I graduated from medical school. And it's also starting to be seen as a partner in parallel work rather than just the very end part of people's lives. If you've got difficult symptoms from your lung disease and several more decades to live with your lung disease, why can't you meet the palliative care team and have your symptoms managed better? And so we're starting to dip in and out of people's trajectory of their illness instead of just being reserved for when the team that's already looking after the patient has nothing left to offer. And it feels for those families, for those patients who've known that team for a long time, as though they fall off a cliff and they're given to the palliative care team. That's not the right way to do it. We need to be weaving in and out far earlier. It's starting to happen.
I guess any progress is good progress, even if it is gradual and even if it is slow. And I definitely agree, the power of connection through social media and stuff means we're finding different avenues to talk about it and normalize it. Just going back to your book a little bit, how did you choose which stories to include in your book? How did you choose?
Yeah, there are a few stories that are stories that I'd used to illustrate specific points when teaching medical students. So they'd been told a lot. They kind of got polished and refined over time. There were a couple of stories that just woke me up in the middle of the night. Oh, that person, that's a really important thing that hasn't been covered yet. I had a big piece of paper, ruled with a ruler, because I'm not very techie. And on my piece of paper, I had down one side all of the things that people worry about. What does the very end of life look like? Are people aware? Is morphine a safe drug? Is it okay to go to a hospice? All of those kinds of everyday concerns that people have. And then over the top, I had male, female, old, young, children, all the different aspects of personhood, so that between the stories we'd cover all the things that people regularly ask about, but also there'd be a spread of who the people were who were central to the story. And then, of course, the really tricky thing was that I couldn't get permission from anyone but one person who was still alive at the time that I was writing the book. And so I had to find ways of anonymizing the stories so that nobody would sit and read a story and think, well, that's my dad. And I suspect a lot of people could read the stories and think, well, that's my dad, because they're describing a process of dying that people have sat beside and will recognise. But to anonymise them, I've changed people's genders, jobs, family structure, racial profile, all sorts of things. But I ended up with 6 stories where the story wouldn't work if I changed too much detail. So I had to go and find those families. And that was just a fantastic thing to do. So there's one family I haven't been able to find. And so there's one story that I'd love to tell but can't. But the other 5 families were so glad to be asked. Said things like, they really wish there'd been something like this for us when we needed it. And one family who I'd first met the year I qualified as a doctor, I looked after a person who I think I called Pete in the book, and I've always got to remember that I've changed everybody's names, not use their real names. And his sons were quite small; they were preschool age when his cancer was first diagnosed, and he had surgery on the ward where I was the most junior doctor in the hospital. And then he became sick and his cancer came back again whilst I was training, working in a hospice. And the whole family came back under my care with our team. And by now his kids were kind of top of first school into middle school age. And when I approached them later, found their mum, and she said, I'll have to ask the boys. They're men, they're grown-ups, they've got family of their own. And one of them read their story and sent me notes. He was my first reviewer. And that was so fantastic. And he said, I can remember visiting the hospital, and Mum must have needed time with Dad on their own, and we weren't big enough to understand that. And you sat with us with colouring books in a room on the hospital ward on a rainy weekend day. So what a journey to go with that whole family. So it feels a little bit that I've broken trust with people who never thought I'd tell their stories in public. But I hope that they would see the good that's happened and the kind of aha moments for people who've been either consoled because they're facing their dying, that, oh, okay, I can, if that's what it's like, I can do that. Or are looking back on the death of a beloved person and are able to reframe it and understand that it was perhaps not the struggle they believed it to be. So I hope they'd be glad that their stories are helping people.
I feel like there will be. When I started this journey on wanting to capture this whole kaupapa around dying, and I asked people if there's anyone that's wants to share their story. I was overwhelmed by the number of people that were wanting to share a story, because I think what they realised, it wasn't as hard as they expected it to be, and they wanted other people to know that. So I believe that there are a lot of people that do want their stories to be heard and to be shared. So I have no doubt that they will be thankful for that. What are some practical ways we can do? Well, what are some practical things that we can do to start a conversation about death and dying with our friends, with our family? What are some practical...
So I had a lot of feedback from people saying, okay, you've convinced us we need to talk about this. But how do you do that then? Or, I'm 97, I really need to talk to my kids about the end of my life, and they just won't let me, they just won't listen, or whatever. And when you write a bestseller, your publishers are very, very keen for a second book. And I kept saying, no, there isn't a second book. I'm done here. But the correspondence about the conversations was what set me off on the writing again of the second book, which is about exactly this. How do we get into conversations that matter so much that we're going to be emotional in the holding of the conversation? And I think that's what makes it daunting for us. Not just about dying, about anything that really matters. And so the second book is called Listen, because that's the thing actually that matters most, and isn't just a death book. But I think one of the things that's really crucial is I might want to talk about it and you're not ready yet. And on a different day, you might want to talk about it and today's not the best day for me. But you can kind of stamp a marker that says, when it's a good time for you, I would really like it if we could please talk about this. So it's an invitation, and you don't have to go further than the invitation. But once you've said it out loud, you've got over that terrible hump of, I don't even know if it's okay to mention it. So, Mum, you've given me powers of attorney, and I really want to get it right for you. So sometime when it's okay for you, in the next few weeks, could we just sit down and talk about what really matters most to you, and are there any things you especially want me to make sure don't happen? And I really hope I never have to speak for you, that you'll be able to speak for yourself for the whole of the time. But just in case, I'm honoured to have the responsibility, but I want to do it right for you. And just leave it there. Oh, I've said it. It's out of my mouth. I don't have to worry about it. And, Mum didn't explode when I said those words, so it's okay. And then just to remember that the important part of a conversation about things that are as tender as end-of-life care, the most important part is the listening that we do. Because when we come to a point where we have to make a decision later on, we all want to go back to that conversation. What did my husband actually say? What did my wife say that she wanted? Oh yeah, we talked about that over Christmas dinner, didn't we? Christmas is a great time because these are conversations that are joyful. What's the most important thing for you? What makes your life meaningful? What brings you joy? If I'm the doctor in the emergency department and I say to you, your dad's so sick that he could be dying here, there's a variety of things that we could try. I'm not sure whether or not they're going to succeed, but it will help me to choose the treatment that's the most appropriate if you can explain to me what's most important to your dad. So if what's most important to your dad is that he can run up a mountain and abseil off the top, and I know I can't get him back to there, then that's a different set of medical treatments from the most important thing to my dad is, even if he can't get out of a chair anymore, that he can sit in his house that he built and look out on his land. Okay, well, I can probably push the treatment so that we could get to there. So I'm not asking families to make medical decisions, but the medical team can wrap the alternatives for treatment around the values of the person. So what matters to you conversations, joyful conversations, actually come back to help you later on.
I love the idea of inviting an invitation. I think that is a great way to start, and something that I definitely am going to invite, particularly my whānau or family, to that conversation. Just to kind of finish up, because I know you've got other engagements today, one of the things I kind of took was that around use of language, like I guess the questions that are asked by a healthcare team, do you think we're doing it right? Like asking the questions around what it is that this person, your father, who may be sick or dying, do you think we're asking the right questions? I feel like I haven't sat in a space before where healthcare professionals have kind of asked that, what is it that they wanted? What is it? It feels like it's always been quite medically driven, and this is what it is, and we've kind of been left with it. There's a language. I
think there is a language, and I think that medical teams often don't use the language because they're not thinking about dying. They're thinking about, what do I do to reverse this medical process that's happening to this person? This person's having a heart attack, they're having a stroke, they've got overwhelming infection, medical thing. And what I want them to learn in medical school, nursing school, paramedic training, whatever, is noticing, understanding the process of dying, being able to stop themselves in the middle of that flurry and say, is this person already so sick that they could die? Because if they are, that doesn't mean stop trying to save their life, but start the parallel plan of, if all of the medical clever stuff that we do doesn't save their life, what will we wish tomorrow that we'd done today to make their dying better? And be able to hold that tension early enough on that you can say to a family, this person is so sick that they might die. Who else needs to be here? What are the cultural practices that will make the dying safe and right for them? It doesn't mean we're giving up. It doesn't mean we're not trying all of the other things. But in case we can't do that, in case we can't pull this back, what else should we be doing? And sometimes that actually allows a family to say, Dad said if he was ever so sick that he was dying, just back off, let him go peacefully. He doesn't want lots of medical intervention. If the possibility of dying doesn't get discussed, then Dad's saying, if it's so possible that I might die, these are my wishes, also doesn't get discussed. And it's almost as though there's magical thinking that if you say one of the D words in the room with the patient, you're going to make it happen, rather than, I think we need a new attitude, which is when I can't save a person's life, what can we do as individuals, as a medical team, as a patient and the people who love them around them? What can we do that saves the death and sends this family into their bereavement in the safest way that they can go?
And when I think about that too, it's not just the team, because I guess as family, if we haven't had a conversation with it, we're panicking, and so we're trying to tell medical teams, do what you need to, do what you just save. But again, if we've had a conversation beforehand, we might be in a better place to hear the conversation from the medical team, because I know that family don't want to hear certain things, or we can't do anything, we just keep them comfortable. And that can be hard to hear, especially if you haven't had a conversation with them beforehand. So I guess it reiterates the importance of this conversation across family, patients, healthcare systems. And I thank you very much for the work that you're doing in this space, to have more conversations, to have the literature that we can look at. I've watched you on TED Talk, I've watched all those, and the story that you spoke about with your grandmother, and the difference in what she experienced to what you experienced at 23 years old is just so different. But I feel very inspired, and I'm very grateful to be sitting here with you. So I thank you for your time. There's so many more questions, but I think I might wait for tonight to ask those questions that are just really for me, really. So thank you.
Well,
Kathryn,
thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. You're welcome. It's very great that you're here and to be able to catch up. Thank you.